Well, here we are on the cusp of the Singapore Grand Prix. What
Yeah.
thoughts do you have when you think of the Singapore Grand Prix as an engineer and your experience of going to that race over the years? What are your key points?
Um, yeah, I mean, when we first started, it was obviously there's the heat, which affects everybody. The track is quite a long track. It was incredibly bumpy the first time we went there. So bumpy, in fact, that it was the first track that at McLaren we had a lidar for the simulator, and we ran it for the first time, and it was so bumpy we actually thought it must be wrong. So we actually turned down the bumps for that first session in the simulator just to make it drivable. And then when we got to the track, we found it actually was as bad as the map had said. It's a circuit which is very unforgiving, obviously with the walls. The curbs are a big problem for the ride of the car. It was always a good one. Kevin was always brilliant around there. Recent working with Haas. Last year we had a bit of an issue with an aerodynamic development that he didn't have on his car that Nico had, which blunted his performance somewhat. But it's always been it's a difficult track. There's lots of different types of corners. The tyres get hot and lose grip through the lap. So by the end of the lap, they're really screaming. The last two corners onto the start-finish straight are very different than the rest of the track. So they always present a big problem in terms of balance. And just stringing a clean lap together for the drivers has always been tricky. It's a fabulous track. I really enjoyed those races, and I always enjoyed being in the Far East as well. And it's a good event. Being the first night race that we ever did made it special back then, and it is still different. I just think it was one of the most enjoyable events. It's just always a pleasure to get back to your cold hotel room after you've been outside for 17, 18 hours. That was all.
In theory, because of the local time schedule, you
Yeah.
keep the same body clock. Did that always work for you? Was there a difficulty in adjusting to that?
Uh, it it was certainly it was a bit of a strange one to start with. Um, I wouldn't say for the teams it presented a huge problem. I think the first year we went, our scheduling was a bit awry because we started off working to normal time schedule, so normal Singapore daytime schedule for the sort of setup, and then we drifted to the actual event timing on the sort of Thursday, Friday, and that was a big problem. And then I think all the teams eventually corrected to going in late in the afternoon on the first day and working till early in the morning. So you're just sticking to a more European time. And of course, it had the added benefit of when you came home again, you actually didn't have to convert back to European time, if as long as it wasn't a back-to-back race. So I don't think for the mechanics and the engineers, etc., I don't think it was a huge issue. It just seemed a bit strange. I think the drivers maybe felt it a bit more. I think some of them certainly complained, or didn't complain, but just said it was difficult to manage. And I think sometimes they had sponsor functions and media events that were more normal daytime based, and they found it difficult to incorporate them into their schedule. But overall, it was surprisingly straightforward, I think, the first time we did it. And it always was quite, you always seem to have more time on your hands. That was the other thing we couldn't understand, is you actually felt like you had more time. It was really odd, even though you have the same schedule, but somehow you felt like you had more time. It was odd.
Weird, weird. Mark, you touched on the question of tire temperatures and the heat involved
Yeah,
in Singapore and managing the tires. A
yeah.
lot of discussion at the moment about the improvements Red Bull appear to have made, and on the assumption that their new floor is working for a more efficient aerodynamic package for them, which would kind of seem to be the case at Monza and in Baku. Can you give us some idea of what problems they may be looking at in terms of tire management for Singapore? Is tire management something to be taken separately from the improvement in the floor, or will that have an impact on the way they can use the tires?
Uh, I will definitely have some sort of impact because the sort of the shape of the aero performance in terms of ride height management will affect how the car uses its tires, how it how it avoids overslipping them over bumps. So if they've improved their tyre management through a floor development, it's quite likely that it's not just a question of adding downforce. It may well be that they've got a profile that is a better shape, so the driver has more downforce more of the time than he had before, and so maybe they don't have to run the car quite so stiff to keep it in a very narrow working range. And that, if that is the case, then the reduction in stiffness basically helps keep the tyres in contact with the ground more of the time, which is easier for the tyres. They'll slip less because they're seeing less load variation, and that will reduce temperatures. So if it's something like that, then it will have a big effect on their tyre management. And Singapore being such, it's still a relatively bumpy circuit. It got a lot smoother as they resurfaced it over the years, and I think the curbs became less aggressive as well. But it's still something it's at the forefront. And being such a long lap with the fast corners at the end of the lap, keeping those tyres alive for the full lap in qualifying and obviously for the duration of the race is really important. It's tough on the rear tyres in Singapore.
Just talking about ride height, in 2025, what is the defining element of the ride height you can run with? Presumably you just want to run as low as possible at any given moment, but is it bumps? Is it curbs? Is it bouncing still? Is it tyre management? What is it? What is the final point that you look at?
It's going to most likely come down to skid wear in the end. On most tracks, the tracks are smooth enough that the limitation will tend to be the how low you can run the car, end of straight, or possibly there might be some curbs somewhere which also contribute to skid wear. But on most circuits, it's that. If there is severe bottoming on a very bumpy circuit, you might reach the limitation of what the car can take in terms of impact. So, for instance, it wouldn't be a huge surprise if the engine was vulnerable to impact, because obviously the floor is attached through the engine at the back of the car, and I know on some engines, if the impacts got too severe, they would ask us to do something to mitigate that. So that might be a limitation. Bouncing, it was a limitation in the early days of this generation of car, but I think most teams have developed their cars and kind of mitigated those problems, so that became less of an issue. But the bottom line is there's almost always more downforce to be had by running the car as low as you can get it. The difficulty is in balancing. You can't run the car infinitely stiff because the cars won't stay on the road, which is obviously what you'd do to get the car as low as possible. So it's that compromise between how stiff can you get away with and getting the car as low as you can. And then if you have a car with a wider range of rear ride height downforce performance, it puts you in a better position, because you could probably run the car a little bit softer and be easier on the tyres. If you have a car with a very peaky floor, then you really do have to stay in that window, and it might just be that you have to run the car stiff and you can't avoid it, and then you're looking at tyre degradation problems. So yeah, that's the sort of thing that the engineers on the teams will be trying to come up with the best compromise with, and using their simulators and simulation tools, as well as their knowledge from previous events, to try and come up with the best starting solution for that, and then obviously evolving that as the week progresses.